From the patient files of Dr. William Wickman, director of Hillbrook Insane Asylum. Patient number 404, Emelie Cranston, aka the Purple Dragon. Session 1. Patient suffers from severe delusions and hallucinations and mild depression. These symptoms are most likely the results of schizophrenia. Black female, age 25, black hair, brown eyes, 5.7 feet tall, 150 pounds. The session, my first with the patient, took place yesterday. She arrived here at Hillbrook a week ago, but I've simply been too busy to meet her. I was also too busy to record the session yesterday, so I'm doing it now instead. So as usual, before entering the session room, I observed the patient through a two-way mirror. She was sitting on her chair by the table, wearing a straitjacket. So far, the patient has not displayed any violent tendencies since being admitted. But this early on, it's unsure to tell how a patient will behave. For the staff's safety's sake, the patients are thus required to wear straitjackets until their danger level has been determined. 404 was anxiously tapping her foot on the floor. Her gaze darted nervously around the room. The eyes were bloodshot and had dark circles around them. Her skin had an unhealthy tone to it. She probably hasn't gotten enough sleep. Sleeping pills may need to be prescribed. I entered the room. She immediately turned to look at me with big, frightened eyes. "Hello," I said. "I'm Dr. William Wickman. How are you feeling today, Emelie?" "I don't know," she said. Then she asked if she could make a phone call. She wanted to call her boyfriend, Mark. It was urgent, she said, an anxious and worried tone in her voice. Of course, the patient had already made a phone call that day, to her boyfriend Mark even. In fact, she had called him every day since being admitted. 1 phone call per day is all we allow the patients. I told her that. But she still insisted. She had to call him, make sure he was all right. "He was all right this morning, wasn't he, when you last called?" I said. She nodded. "Well, then he's probably all right now too. You can call him first thing next morning," I said with a reassuring smile. She didn't like it, but seemed to accept it. I placed 404's file on the table and began flipping through it. I pulled up her criminal record. Now, you wouldn't think it just by looking at her, but that sweet young woman had committed some heinous crimes. She was convicted for brutally murdering 7 people. 7 people across 7 weeks. 1 murder per week. All 7 victims were derelicts, destitute homeless people, every one of them either drug abusers or alcohol abusers, or both in some cases. I knew why she killed them, it was all in the files. But I needed to hear her say it. So I simply asked her, "Emelie, why did you kill those 7 homeless people?" Her face turned into a pained expression. Both of her feet now began to nervously tap on the floor, and she looked down, avoiding my gaze. "I didn't want to kill them," she said. "I never wanted to hurt anyone." "Then why?" I pried. She looked up at me with terrified eyes, then down again. "It forced me to do it." "It?" I asked. "Yes, the creature. The creature forced me. I had no choice." The creature. You see, patient 404's bizarre nickname does not refer to herself. It refers to this creature, the object of her fixation, the purple dragon. "The purple dragon, you mean?" I asked. "I never said purple dragon," she quickly and dismissively answered. I got a bit confused there. Purple dragon is what it said in the files. "Excuse me?" I said. "I never said purple dragon," she repeated. "It's a misquote. It wasn't a dragon, that's silly. It was more of a lizard thing. A big lizard creature. And it wasn't really purple, it was more of a dark magenta color. Oh, okay, I said. So tell me about this magenta lizard, Emelie. The patient began to do so. She told me how she first encountered it. It was in the woods nearby her house. According to her files, she lived in a small suburban area just outside the city, close to a large wooded area. She lived there with her boyfriend Mark. It was actually his house. Apparently she moved in there just 2 weeks prior to beginning the murders. Let's see here. Prior to moving in with Mark, Emelie lived with her parents in the city. It was apparently a small apartment in a rather bleak neighborhood, as Emelie puts it. As a teenager, the patient did well with her studies, but after graduating high school, she didn't really do anything with her life. She was directionless, no goals, no real plans. The patient also began to suffer from depression. Her file says she did take medication for this, but only periodically. And then, according to her, when she was 24, she met Mark on a dating site. Mark Anderson, his name is, a real estate agent, 8 years her senior. They began to date and started a romantic relationship. Shortly after turning 25, she moved in with Mark in a house he bought outside the city. And 2 weeks later, she sees a giant lizard monster in the woods. These woods surrounding the area, Emelie said with a bittersweet look on her face. She and Mark loved wandering through them. It was such a nice change of pace from the polluted, loud, smelly and crowded city. Then, one day, when Mark was at work, she started, but then began to sob. She sniffled, trying to finish the sentence. I interrupted, saying it was okay. She could take her time, no rush. After a few minutes, she calmed down somewhat and continued. One day, when Mark was at work, she ventured into these woods on her own. That is when she encountered the lizard creature. With fear in her voice, 404 described it as a monster with a massive jaw filled with rows of fangs. She said she was terrified of it. She was even more terrified when the thing spoke to her. According to the patient, it spoke to her in an inhuman voice, yet one she could still understand. "What did it tell you?" I asked. She sat quiet for a while, nervously staring down at the floor. Then said with a cracked voice that it told her it needed to feed. It was hungry. It claimed it hadn't eaten for ages. Animals wouldn't do though. It needed human flesh. 404 explained she naturally assumed the thing was going to eat her. But no, that's not what it meant. It wanted to use her. The lizard creature wanted her to deliver food to it. Deliver human prey for it to feed on. The patient started to shiver as she described this. She began to choke up again. I told her it was alright. We could take it as slow as she wanted. After a few minutes, she once again continued. The creature told her that if she didn't comply with this, if she didn't deliver people to it, it would take Mark instead. Every week it would need to eat. Every week she would feed it. Or else it would feed on Mark. She chose the victims she did because she felt they wouldn't be missed. And she felt they were already miserable anyway. She picked them all up in the city, pretending to be a charity worker running a homeless shelter. Getting them into her car, she then viciously stabbed them to death. Then, she delivered them to the lizard creature. This whole scheme went on for 7 weeks. It was a nosy neighbor who finally put a stop to it, when he informed Mark that Emelie was constantly taking weird trips when he was at work, being away for hours. Mark naturally investigated, following her to see what she was up to. I somehow doubt he expected to discover what he did. He probably expected infidelity. Maybe that would have been better. Patient 404 exhaled after telling her tale, like she was relieved. She then got a worried look on her face again. She began to plead with me that I let her call Mark. She wasn't around to feed the lizard anymore. It would go after Mark now. I repeated she could call him first thing in the morning. Then I flipped through her files and found a coroner's report on her victims, the 7 homeless people. 404 believed she was feeding these people to a beast, that they were being devoured. Well, something did drag them away from where she dumped them in the woods, dragged them deeper into the woods. I looked at the photographs of their corpses. They were chewed to bits. I have the coroner's report on your victims right here, Emelie, I said. I then showed her the photographs. She flinched and looked as she was going to puke. What do you think made these bite marks? I asked. She answered, the lizard creature, of course, looking away. That's not what it says in this report, I said. I then told her what the coroner had written. Bite marks by wolves. 404 sat quiet, staring at me with an odd look on her face. Wolves, Emelie, I repeated. There are wolves roaming about deep in those woods. Several reports on it have been made. These wolves simply smelled the food you presented them, the corpses you dumped there, and came and dragged them away. You were feeding wolves. She scoffed, then laughed. Wolves, she said, like the idea was utterly moronic. Then she laughed again, loudly and obnoxiously. She called me an idiot, said I was wasting her time, said she had to get out, bring more food to the creature. As long as no one was feeding the creature, Mark was in danger. She began to scream at me, calling me foul names, saying she had to get out and feed the creature. That's when I felt our session was over. I think we'll keep patient 404 in a straitjacket for the time being. My diagnosis? 404 suffers from schizophrenia. It began as simple depression. It didn't fully blossom until her 20s, as it so often does. The fact these severe hallucinations began so shortly after moving, I highly suspect a correlation there. This extreme psychosis of hers was most likely set off by this sudden change in her life. She lived with her parents, had nothing going on in her life, felt lonely, felt like a failure, lived in a city she felt uncomfortable in. Then, in a very short time, she's suddenly living the dream life. A beautiful house in a peaceful, quiet neighborhood. Nature just a few yards away. A great guy that she loves. A successful guy. Deep down, 404 probably felt she didn't deserve it. It was too good for her. So, she created this fake threat in her mind. Something that could take it all away. Why a purple dragon? A magenta lizard? I have no idea. Hopefully, I'll uncover more in our next session. End recording.